Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for logging in to hear about a very important topic. What we're going to be discussing tonight is the situation regarding college campuses and the anti-Israel sentiment that's growing there on. We have the privilege tonight of hearing from Professor Alan Dershowitz, who will be addressing us for about 15 minutes about the situation on campuses. And this is what our organization, JerusalemOnlineU.com, is designed to address. As you can see on their screens right now, this is our home page. We encourage you to check it out and to get involved in our different programs. We not only show the problems, we address the solutions. And this page in particular, StepUpForIsrael.com, provides wonderful resources through film, as well as links and other materials that we recommend, including Professor Dershowitz's books, particularly The Case for Israel and The Case Against Israel's Enemies. I'm going to introduce him. Professor Dershowitz has authored over 27 different works, and he's easily the most visible Israel advocate in the world today. There's no more authoritative person when it comes to speaking Israel's case from all perspectives, particularly that of a advocate for human rights and civil rights here in the United States, which lends this important issue an incredible amount of credibility. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over the computer to Professor Dershowitz.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be speaking to you via this modern technology. I wish I was speaking about a more pleasant subject. The problem on college campuses is very serious, and it's particularly serious because college students are tomorrow's leaders. When I look out on my law school and college classes, I teach lots and lots of students, both law students and college students. I don't see just students. I see the future President of the United States. I see the future Chief Justice of the United States. I see congressmen, senators, CEOs of corporations. I see future journalists and just leaders of the world. And these are students who are today being influenced, I would say propagandized, by a very concerted effort by the hard left and by anti-Israel zealots to make Israel delegitimate in the minds of the students, to demonize Israel, to compare them to apartheid South Africa, sometimes even to Nazi Germany. And the answer to falsehood is not censorship, it's truth. And therefore, we have an obligation to try to promote the truth and to try to promote it through video, through appearances on campuses, through the use of social media, through every conceivable way of reaching the hearts and minds of our students. And we're not getting a lot of help from pro-Israel college professors. In my experience, there are exceptions to this, of course, but for the most part, pro-Israel university professors are the least courageous group of people I've ever met. They don't speak the truth. They don't speak out. They remain silent. They feel intimidated. The students have been leading the campaign against those professors who make the case against Israel and those agitators on college campuses who make the case against Israel. So it's very important that we put together material that students have available to them, the ability to find information and to disseminate information. Part of the problem is not only that anti-Israel rhetoric on campus is well funded by Islamic groups, but also because they have the alliance of many self-hating anti-Israel Jewish and even Israeli professors, people like Noam Chomsky and Norman Finkelstein and Gilad Atzmon, a former Jew and former Israeli who's now become a virulent anti-Semite, Richard Falk, a former professor at Princeton, Tony Kirshner, the Tony Award-winning playwright, Ilan Pappé, and many others. And they can cite these Jews as, and some of them Israelis, as kind of credibility builders for the case against Israel. And so it's what I call argument by ethnic identity. Well, if they're Jewish and if they're Israeli and if they're saying Israel's bad, that must be true. Nonsense. It's often the case that these people have an agenda. Sometimes it's an anti-Israel agenda. Sometimes it's an anti-American agenda. Sometimes it's a hard left agenda. Sometimes it's a hard right agenda, as with the case of Pat Buchanan and some others who have been virulently anti-Israel. It's very important that we see the college campus as the battleground, almost as important in many ways as actual battlegrounds that occur. And it's, by the way, not only college campuses, it's moving down to high schools. Recently, the Friends Seminary in New York invited Gilad Atzmon to speak to a class of students. Gilad Atzmon is a man who says that the Holocaust narrative is false. In other words, the Holocaust didn't occur. And second, he says that Jews may very well have killed Christian children and used their blood in the baking of matzahs. He has apologized to the Gestapo and to Nazis for comparing Israel to them, saying that Israel is much worse than the Nazis and the Gestapo. He has said that the modern Jewish religion is the most warlike and dangerous religion in the world, and on and on and on and on. He's invited to speak to what purports to be a peace-loving Quaker school, the Friends School, and when the headmaster was advised of this, he did absolutely nothing. In fact, he refused to invite me to speak on the campus or other pro-Israel speakers to speak on the campus. He seemed satisfied to have only the anti-Israel perspective presented. He's also sending a group of students to Ramallah, where they will hear the Palestinian perspective. These students already have a history professor who on his website, he's a high school kid, on his website has a picture of Anne Frank wearing an Arab Palestinian headdress, suggesting that Anne Frank is the Palestinian and the Jews are the new Nazis. This is a teacher of 13, 14, 15, 16-year-old students, very impressionable. And this is the Friends School, and this is what's happening today on college and university campuses. So what we're seeing is a movement from anti-Israel to anti-Zionist to anti-Semitic. Now, of course, criticism of Israel is a good thing. It's certainly not anti-Semitic to be critical of Israeli policies. Everybody should be critical of policies of every country. If criticism of Israel were anti-Semitic, the greatest concentration of anti-Semites in the world would be in Tel Aviv, because obviously many Tel Avivians are very critical of Israeli policies. Just read Haaretz. We're not talking about criticism of Israeli policies. We're talking about demonization of Israel, delegitimation of Israel. We're talking about a double standard that people apply only to Israel. You can't get college students today to have any kind of demonstration against what's going on in Syria, against what's going on in Iran, against the murder of dissidents in many parts of the Arab world. But if Israel does anything, even if it does nothing wrong, you can immediately get demonstrations against Israel on college campuses. So I want to have a conversation with you, a discussion with you. What is your experience? What have you heard? What do you think we can do to set this right? Let me tell you what the answer is not. The answer is not censorship. The answer is not to try to prevent these speakers from speaking on campus. We will lose that fight, and we should lose that fight. Colleges should be open forums for all kinds of debate, every kooky idea, not in the classrooms, but outside of the classrooms. And we have to be prepared to answer falsehood with truth. The best answer to falsehood is not censorship, it's truth. And so we're here tonight, and generally we're here to support the truth on campus and presenting alternate points of views on campus. I'm not worried. If all points of view are heard on campus, the pro-Israel point of view will prevail. So thank you, and let's have your questions.
Ask them in words, so I have questions here. Why doesn't the mainstream media speak out against the anti-Israel sentiment?
Well, the question is the mainstream media. You can't generalize about the mainstream media. New York Times, for example, its news coverage is generally fair. Its editorial page seems to be somewhat slanted against Israel these days. The Washington Post, mixed record on Israel. It used to be very anti-Israel on its editorial pages. Now it seems to be moving in a somewhat different direction. CNN, mixed record. 60 Minutes on CBS, a very bad record. 60 Minutes is one of the most inaccurate shows on television today. I've had my experiences with 60 Minutes, the way they absolutely distort reality. They start out with a point of view of how they're going to present anything, and then they twist and edit and turn. It's one of the least credible shows on network television, and yet it has the highest level of credibility rating. So, be cautious. Watch 60 Minutes with great caution. They can make you believe almost anything because they can edit what they say to make almost anything come out differently from the way it was actually stated or presented to them. So it's a mixed record on the media. The New Republic used to be very pro-Israel. Now it's been bought by somebody from Facebook. Who knows whether it will be or won't be. But blaming the media doesn't get you anywhere. Influence the media. Use your own media. Use the Internet to present the accurate story of Israel. Complaining about the media is not going to get the case out there.
Another question is, when I speak about Israel, people, they ask me, do I work for the Israel lobby, and why should I care about Israel?
Well, people ask me the same question. People assume that I'm an employee of the Mossad or an employee of the Shin Bet or an employee of Israel. I'm completely independent. I don't take orders from anybody. I'm critical of Israel's policies on the West Bank. I've been critical of other Israeli policies. I wish Israel would have a settlement freeze now to force the Palestinians to come back to the bargaining table. Everybody should be independent. We don't work for anybody. We have our own strong personal beliefs. You should care about Israel because Israel is a democracy. Israel cares about the rights of women, the rights of gays, the rights of the environment. Israel produces more life-saving medical technology than any country per capita in the world. Israel has saved, through its medical experts, more Arab and Muslim lives than all the Arab and Muslim countries in the world combined. If you believe in good things, if you believe in human rights, if you believe in liberal values, talking about with a small L, then you should support Israel. But I'll give you an example. A few years ago, the Chief Justice of Israel was a woman. Actually, she just stepped down. She had to retire because of age. The presiding speaker of the Knesset was a woman, and the foreign minister of Israel running for prime minister was a woman. And so Ms. Magazine had an ad that was sent to it saying, "This too is Israel," and it simply showed the three pictures of the three women who were legislative branch, executive branch, and judicial branch. Ms. refused to run the ad, saying our readers, our feminist readers, would not want to read propaganda on behalf of Israel. So, that's the problem. When you have gays for Palestine who don't know that if you're a gay for Palestine in Palestine, you'll be killed. What gays for Palestine do in Palestine is they escape to Israel, where they know they can be treated equally.
Question from Celia. I'm a professor in a university. What can I do?
Speak up. Speak up. Professors have a very bad record when it comes to Israel. The anti-Israel professors are vocal. They speak up. The pro-Israel professors are cowards. I don't know if you share this view, but I've been teaching at Harvard for 48 years. I've had tenure for 45 years. I've never met a bunch of less courageous people than tenured university professors. They're terrified that students won't like them, that they'll get low evaluations, that somehow they'll be unpopular. You have tenure. If you have tenure, you have an obligation to speak your mind. I have more respect for Noam Chomsky, who expresses very anti-Israel point of views, than I do for pro-Israel professors who don't have the courage to speak up. I'm sure you're not one of them, so I hope you will speak your mind, convene events, hold conferences, write op-eds for your local newspaper, have a website, reach the students. Don't propagandize in your classroom. I don't want to see pro-Israel propaganda in the classroom any more than I want to see anti-Israel propaganda in the classroom. The classroom is not the proper place for your ideology to be imposed on a captive audience.
What can be done on a very liberal campus to promote Israel's image where nobody cares about religion and everybody thinks, quote unquote, the government is out to get them?
Well, first of all, bring me. I'm not religious. I don't defend Israel on religious grounds. I don't believe the Bible is the Word of God. I don't accept the first Rashi in the Bible, which says that the reason the Bible starts with Bereshit, with the first story of creation, is so that we can say to the world, God gave us the land of Israel. I think Israel is defensible on totally secular grounds. Herzl was completely secular. He'd never been in the inside of a synagogue before he wrote Der Judenstaat. Ben-Gurion was completely secular. Israel is one of the most secular countries in the world. It's a secular democracy. It has no established religion. Christianity, Islam, and Judaism all have equal rights in Israel, and so do atheists and agnostics, who form a majority of the Israeli population. So the best case for Israel is the liberal, secular case. I would have trouble making the religious case for Israel, but I have no trouble making the secular case, the secular democratic case for Israel as a nation-state of the Jewish people.
on the other hand, entirely. The question is about Christian support for Israel and opposition to Israel given the persecution of Christians in many Muslim countries.
Well, 60 Minutes is apparently either done or preparing a program that just blatantly lies about the status of Christians in Israel. Christians are thriving in Israel. It's the only place in the Middle East that Christians are thriving, as Michael Oren's op-ed in the New York Times recently showed, or maybe it was the Wall Street Journal, I don't remember where it appeared, but Christians are thriving in Israel. There are more than 1 million of them. And, I'm sorry, there are more than 1 million non-Jews who live in Israel. A significant number of them are Christians. Christians, the population of Christians are growing in Israel. It's shrinking everywhere else. It's disappeared in Gaza. It's shrinking in the West Bank. It's shrinking in Lebanon. It's virtually disappeared in Syria. Christians are being persecuted in Egypt, but not in Israel. And so I understand why Christians are very supportive of Israel. And 60 Minutes is going to try to persuade the American Christian public that that's not the case, but don't believe what you hear in 60 Minutes. It's an absolute outright lie.
And what about the Christian denominations that are coming out against Israel?
Well, you know, Christians have a right to express whatever views they express. I think it's a mistake. When the Presbyterians tried to divest from Israel, the majority of the Presbyterians rejected that, and they have to change their views. There are individual Christian leaders in the Episcopal Church and the Presbyterian Church and the so-called liberal churches, particularly the Quakers, who have been long opposed to Israel, but the vast majority of Christians understand that Israel is a very important place where freedom of religion thrives and where Christianity thrives, and Christians should continue to support Israel, not necessarily on religious grounds. The Catholic Church has changed its views. The Pope went to Israel. The Vatican has a mixed record on Israel, but it's far more supportive today than it was years ago.
Question towards your legal expertise in this capacity, which is a student reports that a professor from a different university was brought to his campus and spoke on the campus television saying that any Israeli over the age of 18 is a legitimate target for terrorism. The student was told that there was little he could do about this because this was within the professor's capacity of free speech. Is this in fact the case?
Well, first, of course, it's a lie. No international scholar, no scholar of human rights would tell you that civilians over the age of 18 are subject to being targeted. It's just absolutely false. It's ignorant. That would say the same thing about the United States. When the United States had a draft, it would mean that any college student sitting in his classroom who conceivably could be subject to the draft could be murdered. It's absurd, and nobody should take seriously people who make statements like that. You know, free speech gives you the right to be stupid, gives you the right to be an ignoramus, gives you the right to be a bigot and a racist. You know, many of us defended the rights of Nazis to march through Skokie. And the guy who makes this statement has the same right. He has the right to be wrong, and boy, is he wrong.
Question is from a student who was tabling for Israel this week, and people would come up and ask, is it smarter to start with talking pro-Israel or start with defending Israel and explaining that the IDF is in fact a humanitarian army?
The IDF is the most humane and humanitarian army, not only in the world today, but in the history of warfare. You don't have to believe me for that. If you listen to Colonel Kemp, who was the head of forces in Afghanistan for the British, just look at the Israeli army's records. They've killed fewer civilians than any army in history. They've done more to protect civilians from being in harm's way than any army in history. Just compare Israel's record with NATO's record. It's not even a close question. Compare Israel's record with what happened in Iraq or Afghanistan. You know, you don't judge a country by what one individual does, whether it's the American soldier today who just killed 15 or 16 Afghans. You judge a country by what happens to him, whether he's put on trial. And in Israel, any soldier who violates the very, very, very onerous rules of engagement is punished. And Israel's record in civilian deaths, I mean, Israel has caused more civilian deaths since its existence than Jordan did in 1 month in Black September, when they killed more Palestinians than probably Israel killed since 1948. The same thing is true when you compare it to Syria. More civilians have been killed in a couple of months than Israel has killed in its entire history, civilians. So Israel has the best record in the history of warfare in terms of protecting civilian lives. And, you can lie about it, you can distort it, you can try to present a different perspective, but it's just not the case. The reality, the figures talk for themselves.
Were you to discuss Israel with somebody who was in the middle and hadn't made up their mind in terms of leaning one way or the other, would you go with a more proactive, Israel's a wonderful place, or a more aggressive posture towards the haters of Israel?
Well, I think you do a combination of both. I think you try to present the positive case for Israel and then respond to all questions. I think you never censor the opposing point of view. When I speak on college campuses, the first thing I tell students is, ask me the hardest question you've ever been asked. I want to be confronted with that. Or ask me the hardest question you've ever thought of that nobody has asked you. I want to hear the hardest questions, and I want to be able to answer them, and I want to be able to acknowledge that Israel is not perfect. Look, when Israel left Lebanon and left behind cluster bombs, I was critical of Israel, and so are many Israelis critical of Israel for doing that. You can be comfortable criticizing Israel for particular policies, but if you look at Israel's record as a whole, it's excellent. Is it an A? No, no country in the world is an A. It's probably a B+ in terms of human rights compared to other countries that range from B- to F, 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 which are most countries of the world today.
What can we do to influence universities to present all sides in the Middle East situation?
Well, first of all, challenge the universities. When the university presents an anti-Israel perspective, just present a pro-Israel perspective, asking for the same amount of money, asking for the same facilities, ask faculty members to join. No anti-Israel event should remain unanswered. It should always be followed. Use it as an educational opportunity, as a teaching moment. I think in the end we can win those battles because the truth is generally on our side.
Speaking of the truth being on our side, can you recommend some credible sources that people can cite when in these discussions?
First, I would make sure that you had online access to a variety of Israeli newspapers in English. Jerusalem Post, Haaretz have Israeli translations. You can get access to them. There are many other good online sources. There are books, my own books, other people's books, which present a variety of perspectives on Israel. Historically, you can read many Morris's books, which are very critical of some Israeli policies, but worth reading. Just read widely and become familiar with the arguments on all sides of the issue.
What do you think the psychological basis is for self-hating Jews?
Look, self-hating Jews have been with us since the beginning of time. The Torah, the Bible, talks about self-hating Jews, whether it be Korach or other people like that. Today we have people, Gilad Atzmon, at least he's honest. He says, I hate the Jewishness in me. I want to rid myself of all traces of my Jewish and Israeli past. And so he says that Jews kill Christian children, they use their blood in matzahs, the Holocaust didn't occur, and the Israelis are worse than the Nazis. Most don't admit it. And but I think if Israel were not the nation state of the Jewish people, you wouldn't see the kind of passionate hatred that many Jews have toward Israel.
Okay, well, we thank you very much, Professor, for your time this evening and for the participants.
I do want to end on a positive note. You can change the world. You can do something different. If each of you just agrees to do 2 hours a week of pro-Israel activity, whether it be writing a letter to the editor, calling up the radio station, convening a conference, handing out leaflets. Leafleting is a very important thing to do. Every time a speaker speaks on a campus against Israel, hand out a leaflet. Make sure the leaflet on one side presents a positive case for Israel, on the other side answers the charges made by the speaker. You can look them up, Google, they always say the same thing. They exchange information all the time, I know, because whenever I speak on campus, they have the 16 lies about Alan Dershowitz that they hand out, and it's always the same because it's all written by Norman Finkelstein. So make sure you do your research. Make sure you have leaflets available to hand out. As students are going into the event, hand them leaflets. As they're leaving the event, students like to read. Most of these events are boring. If you give them a leaflet as they're walking in, they're going to read it while the speaker is speaking because the leaflet's going to be more interesting than the speaker. So do your part. Don't remain silent. Speak up. Truth is on our side.
Speaking of speak up, I'd like to take one last opportunity to tell you about stepupforisrael.com, where you can get the basic information you need to be able to advocate about the facts and the most effective strategies when discussing Israel in your environments. Thank you very much for tuning in and for caring, and we hope to see you out on the front lines speaking up for Israel.